Hey, campfire crew. Let's get it on.
They'll catch you. Yeah. Sure. So what?
Second Encounter by Anonymous. I drive OTR, and when you're on the road long enough, you stop caring where you sleep, as long as the door locks and the bed doesn't smell like cigarettes. That's how I ended up in a cheap roadside motel off Route 12 in southern rural Wisconsin. No name worth remembering. The place had a flickering sign. It was a one-story affair, and the kind of place that looks like it's been waiting to be demolished for the last 20 years. I checked in pretty late, close to 1:30 in the morning, and the clerk barely even looked up at me. I was asleep almost immediately, that kind of dead sleep that comes from just exhaustion, when the knock woke me up. It wasn't a pounding, it wasn't frantic, just 3 soft, deliberate knocks. I sat up in bed. No one knocks on motel doors in the middle of the night unless something's wrong. But I didn't answer it right away, I just listened. There was another knock. Then a voice. A child's voice. "Sir, we need help." That was when the fear hit me. Not all at once, but like cold water spreading across my chest. I slid out of bed and stepped toward the window instead of the door. The curtains were really thin, and yellow light came from the parking lot and bled through. I pulled the curtain back just enough to look outside. 2 children were standing outside my door. A boy and a girl, maybe 10 or 11, barely dressed for how cold it was outside. Their faces were pale, like they hadn't seen the sun in a long time, and they were standing very still, hands at their sides, looking straight at the door. Then they must have noticed that I was looking at them, and they looked over at me. Their eyes were completely black. Not dark brown and not shadowed, I'm talking black, solid black, and somehow empty. My stomach dropped and I thought I was going to throw up. My body was reacting faster than my brain could catch up. Every instinct screamed that I was in danger. Not, hey, this is weird, or, boy, I feel uncomfortable. It was screaming danger. The girl spoke again, her voice perfectly calm. "Please, we just need to come inside." I shook my head without realizing that I was doing it, and I whispered an audible no to an empty room. My glasses were back on the nightstand, and I had the sudden stupid thought that maybe my vision was playing tricks on me. Maybe I wasn't seeing clearly. I turned away for a couple of seconds, just long enough to grab my glasses. When I looked back, the parking lot was empty. There were no kids. I didn't hear any footsteps. I just saw the empty parking lot and looked at my door to my room, and it seemed like nothing had been there. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lights on until morning and jumped at every sound, and at sunrise I went straight to the front office and asked them to call the police. I didn't want to sound crazy, but my voice was shaking anyway. A couple of officers showed up about 20 minutes later, 2 locals. They were polite, but they looked really tired, and not surprised. I told them everything that had happened, the knock, the kids, the weird eyes. Then one of the cops looked at the other one. They asked me which room I was in. When I told them, the older officer sighed quietly and just rubbed his face. "Yeah, you're not the first. We've been out here before." Apparently, there had been multiple complaints over the years. Travelers hearing knocks, seeing kids, feeling threatened, and some people said the children asked to use the phone. Others said that they asked to be let in, and it always happened late at night, and they were always gone when anyone turned around or went back to look at them again. I asked the desk clerk about cameras, but the officer just nodded and said, "Now this is the strangest part. Every time someone reported it, the cameras showed nothing. Or worse, static." The clerk was good enough to show us the footage, and again, nothing there. Brief interference, a flicker, audio distortion with no visible cause. No faces, no bodies, just noise. The cops checked the area anyway, and they didn't find anything. I left as soon as they left, and I didn't even bother checking out properly. I just dropped the key on the counter and drove until I hit daylight and civilization. I haven't gone back, and I don't stop at roadside motels anymore. I don't answer knocks after midnight, and sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep in a quiet hotel room, I swear I hear 3 soft knocks echoing in my head. But I always keep my eyes closed. The Strange Neighbor, submitted by Brian K. Right after COVID, I found myself in a really bad spot. I was 31 years old and had worked my ass off from home for my company all through that really annoying time we remember as COVID. Everyone seemed to be doing well, and I know I did very well myself. I was actually promoted twice during that stretch of time. But less than a year after COVID restrictions went away, my company took a turn for the worse and I ended up losing my job. I fought for my job as best I could, but it was what it was, and there was nothing my superiors could do about it. I got lots of letters of recommendation and, quite frankly, a pretty generous severance. But I didn't know what to do after that. I figured I would just take some time off, and something else that threw a monkey wrench into the works, my girlfriend dumped me. She wouldn't say why, but it was intimated that she wanted a guy with a steady job and income. I made just shy of $200,000 per year, and compared to her $48,000 as a teacher. Now, I'm not going to go off bashing her on anything, but what she did, she did. And again, it wasn't anything I was planning on, but I certainly wasn't going to fight for a woman like that. So, with no job, no girlfriend, and no real plans for much other than getting back into the workforce, I'd been talking to my best friend since childhood. He and his fiancée had just bought a house out in the country, and both of them invited me to stay with them for as long as I wanted, to get my mind off of things and regroup. Rob's fiancée, Jen, was a complete sweetheart and knew I was a little distraught after breaking up with my girlfriend, who I didn't mention yet. I'd been with her for 6 years. Both Rob and Jen were awesome, and I thought, oh well, what the hell, maybe I can help out around the house or whatever, it'll give me time to think, and so on. Frankly, at that point, I was thinking about moving out of the area that I lived in anyway. My lease was almost up, and I worked with my landlord. He let me out a month and a half early with no penalties, and I even got my security deposit back. Another really good guy. At any rate, I packed up all my stuff, put a bunch of it into storage, and then drove 2.5 hours from where I lived to take a country seat for a little bit, while I plotted my next move. I was super grateful to my friends for allowing me to be around other people during that time without any serious commitment. Their house was really awesome. Even though it was way out in the country, it had all the amenities of a suburban home. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bath, 3-car garage, a pond out front, big yard. It was practically a new build at the time. It was only 6 years old. I arrived and was welcomed by not only Rob and Jen, but by Jen's parents, who also lived out that way. The welcome was wonderful, and before I knew it, Rob and his future father-in-law were helping me with my bags. A beer was thrust into my hand, and the 3 of us went out into the back porch patio area to sit and shoot the breeze. I told Rob that I'd handle everything around the house, which he appreciated but said was unnecessary. He just wanted me to be in a good spot. Rob was a psychologist, and he was convinced that if I was on my own in my regular apartment, I would be terribly negative and therefore negative things would happen to me, that I wouldn't get a good job, and so forth and so on. I don't know if that's true. But it doesn't matter because everything did work out, and this story which I've been blathering on about so far has nothing to do with my job and what I did afterwards. After about a week of staying there, I got up to go to the bathroom one night and didn't turn on the lights. My bathroom window looked out over the back land that they owned, and it went back for about 75 yards to one of those country horse-style fences. I don't know if I'm going to be good at explaining this. It wasn't like a wooden or privacy fence, but, like those stakes every 8 feet with cross members between them, completely open for dogs or whatever to jump through, which Rob and Jen's dogs did all the time. The lower glass on my bathroom window was frosted, but the upper portion wasn't. As I took a leak, I looked out into the backyard and saw a figure standing in the moonlight at the edge of the yard by the fence. I stared and thought, Jesus, is that Rob? What the hell is he doing? I made a note to ask him if it was him in the morning, and I stared at the figure for almost 15 minutes. It never moved once. It just stood there by the fence. Eventually I got tired and figured I would just ask him about it in the morning and went back to bed. The next morning I got up later than Rob and his wife, and they'd already left for work, so I just made that mental note to ask him when they got home. When they did, I was busy making dinner. Yeah, I know, they told me not to do things like this, but I just felt like I had to. I pulled Rob aside for a second. Dude, was that you standing in the backyard last night? He looked at me for a moment, not saying anything, then he shook his head and said, No, that wasn't me. The way he said it made me think, or rather understand, that he knew someone had been out there. I asked him, Well, who is it? Has he been out there before? Do you know him? He stood quiet for a second before answering again. Yeah, I know who it is. He's harmless. Just leave him alone. Don't bother him, and he won't bother you. Probably should have told you about this before you got here, but it's my neighbor. But again, he's harmless. He's just out stargazing. So I said to myself, I better honor his wishes and just let it go. But 2 nights later, I was up once again looking out my bathroom window, and there the figure was again, standing at the edge of the yard by the fence, just staring up at the sky. This went on for the next 3 nights, and though I wanted to bring it up to Rob out of respect, I didn't. But I did determine that I was going to go out and see what was going on if the person was out there the next night. Sure enough, I got up around 1 in the morning, and there he was at the edge of the yard. I quietly went downstairs, got 2 beers out of the fridge thinking, here's a little peace offering if things go south, and then I went outside into the warmish early summer night. I quietly walked to the back edge of the yard and noticed that the man didn't look over in my direction and didn't seem to be fazed that someone was approaching him. I don't think he realized I was there at all. When I was about 10 feet from him, I coughed slightly and said, Evening, or should I say morning? That's when the guy broke out of his trance and looked down and then looked over at me. He was in his early to mid-70s, and he had a white-brimmed hat on and stood there smoking a cigarette. He looked at me for a second, not startled and not ashamed. He just said, Yep, as if he didn't care that I didn't know it was morning or night. I offered my name and extended a hand, and he looked down at my hand, then reached out to take it. He shook it and said, Pleasure to meet you. My name's Ed. I asked him what he was doing, thinking that he would tell me to mind my own business. I mean, he just had this gentle way about him. And after a couple of seconds, I realized he wouldn't ever talk to anyone like that. He just simply said, Waiting for them to come back. I said, Waiting for who? Rob and Jen? He laughed a little and shook his head, then looked up into the sky and sort of pointed with his nose and chin and said, No, them. I looked up into the starry sky and sat and thought for a minute. I mean, Rob had said this guy was a little weird, but harmless. I said, Huh? Where are they from? He didn't say anything for a little while, then shook his head and stubbed out a cigarette on the ground. I don't rightly know, he said. I'm not sure. I guess maybe I'll find out if they come back. I said, How long has it been since they've been here? And he sort of sighed and shrugged his shoulders and said, Well, my Mary died 10 years ago, so it was about 2 years before that. I'm guessing around 12 years. I said, not knowing if I was amusing him or on the edge of making him feel angry and dumb, You waited that long and you're going to keep waiting? He just said, Yep, and went back to looking at the stars. That's when I remembered I had that second beer and I offered it to him. He took it and said thanks. I asked him what had happened the last time they'd been here, and he said, They showed me a lot of wonderful things. Even took me for a ride. Now, seriously, in the back of my head I was thinking, okay, this guy is a little nuts, but he seems really nice and sweet. He must be one of those UFO buffs and has a goofy story to tell that nobody else believes. But on cue, as if he'd been reading my mind, he said, "Yeah, lots of wonderful things they've shown." Not that anybody believes me. Even Mary thought I was crazy. He took a long swig of the beer, looked back at me and said, "Do you think I'm crazy?" I smiled a bit and said, "I don't know you well enough to know if you're crazy or not, but after the few minutes we've just been standing here, I don't think so." He smiled again, then stopped talking and went back to staring at the sky, and I realized that in his mind I'd been dismissed. It didn't really matter anymore, that conversation. I just stood there for another 10 or 15 minutes looking up at the sky with him. I asked him a few questions, but he never responded and just kept looking up. That's when I realized I should probably just go back to the house, get in bed, and go back to sleep. That's what I did. The next evening, I told Rob about my encounter, and he just said, "Yeah, we met him when we first got out here. We never knew his wife, and obviously she passed on well before we got here." I asked him about his talk of aliens and stuff, and them. He just kind of smiled and said, "Yeah, he's got it in his head that there's aliens out there and they're coming back to get him." I looked right at Rob and said, "Do you believe him?" He just said, "Well, how would I know?" I mean, he was smiling. He just said, "It's a big universe, my friend, and I don't judge anyone." So things went on the same for the next 4 weeks, and Ed was out there almost every night, except for nights that it rained or was heavily clouded. One night, something happened that some people are going to think is bullshit, and maybe not think is frightening, but I think it's scary as hell. Up to this point, anybody listening could say, "Okay, when is all this scary stuff going to happen?" I guess scary is a relative term, and I find this unnerving to this day. I woke up very later in the morning, if that makes sense. I mean, it was way past midnight. Usually when I saw Ed, it was around 1 a.m., but this night it was closer to 3, and I thought to myself, there's no way he's going to be out there. But when I went to the window, there he was. And that's when the craziest thing happened. There was a flash in the sky which I immediately thought of as lightning. I mean, we get a lot of that kind of lightning that crawls across the sky out this way, and I looked up to see the familiar crisscrossing lightning. That's when I saw there wasn't a cloud in the sky. There was another flash, and again I thought to myself, what the hell is doing that? Then suddenly, a light shone down into the backyard, on to Ed. It completely lit him up. I mean, it was like a giant flashlight pointing down from the skies. Then the white light turned a bluish green, and I'm not bullshitting any of you. I started to see Ed vanish in this light. He didn't get sucked up like in a tube. He just started to vanish. Then suddenly the light turned off, and he was gone. Ed was no longer standing in the backyard. I'd realized I hadn't even thought to look up yet, so I craned my neck to see what I could see out the window. And all I saw was blackness, a dark shadow over the entire portion of the sky of Rob and Jen's house in the backyard. I didn't hear anything, I didn't see anything else. I mean, everything had happened in total silence. And then I watched as this dark shape, kind of a triangular shape, started moving off to the west, blocking out all of the sky underneath it. I mean, whatever that thing was, it was huge. And it was silent. And it dawned on me that I was looking at a UFO, or a UAP, whatever you want to call it. And again, there was no sign of Ed. The thing moved off, the stars came back out in the sky, and there was no sign of Ed. I went back to bed as best I could, but I heard Rob wrestling around in the morning, and I realized that he was already up. I went straight over to him in the kitchen. He sat down with a cup of coffee, and I told him the whole story. He was flabbergasted. He looked at me and said, "You're not just making this shit up?" And I said, "Brother, I'm not." He picked up his phone and called Ed's house, and there was no answer. Then he said, "You know what, I'm going to drive over there." And I said I was going with him. We got into his Land Rover, drove over to Ed's house, which was about a mile away, and no one answered the door. We both looked at each other and said, "Nah, it couldn't be." I told Rob in detail what the ship looked like, or the best details that I could give, or whatever I was looking at in the sky. He just couldn't believe it. Well, at any rate, Ed never came back. We never saw him again. Eventually, some of his kids came looking for him, but there was no sign of Ed anywhere. No sign of foul play, nothing. It was as if Ed had just vanished, but I knew better. Through the police and other reports and people asking us questions, we heard from his daughter that she mentioned that one of his suitcases was gone and she believed that some of his clothes were also missing. But that was it. I talked to Rob about maybe telling the authorities what I'd seen, but we decided what was the point. No one would believe me the way they hadn't believed old Ed. So yeah, not too long after that I ended up moving to Florida for a new job, and that's where I've been since. I still see Rob twice a year, and we still talk about this all the time. But we've made it our obligation to not tell anyone what we knew happened to Ed. By this time, Rob's believed me. I do wonder if, wherever he is, Ed's happy. And I think about who that was that came to pick him up. He was so dead set on going with them if they came back. I mean, I could tell that in just the one conversation I had with him. No matter how you slice it, this world is strange. And I can only imagine things are stranger out in that vastness of space. Who knows? I don't believe in the paranormal whatsoever. But do I believe in life outside of this planet? 100%. I can only hope that wherever Ed is, he's happy living his life to the fullest. But the one thing that bothers me, did anyone notice or see that I saw what happened to Ed? And would they ever come back for me? I'm not sure I want a visit from them the way Ed wanted it so badly. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to UncleJoshTrueScaryStories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.